Good evening. I hope you had a good start to your week. Welcome to the show. This is The Day. My name is Medrin Nyambura. So we've talked about this before, where we looked at our wildlife and what we need to do about it. Reason being, and we started this on radio, there's so many generations coming after us, and it's up to us to make sure that when they come, lions are actually real. Okay, they're not just photos, but also we have a bigger responsibility of taking care of our wildlife. We're having that conversation today with three people. One, Jim Karani, animal lawyer, wildlife direct, Karibu Tena. We've had him before. We also have Paul Kadhitu, Kenya Wildlife Service, Karibu. New addition to the family, Anthony Acheng, wildlife conservationist. Sorry, Karibu. How are you doing, Anthony?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Tumekukaribisha, asante.
Asante.
So when we were talking about this, the biggest issue was, what is a wildlife crime? That's the first question I got. So I'll let the lawyer go first. What is a wildlife crime?
So a wildlife crime is pretty much a case where either someone is being accused for either handling a wildlife product, which is either obtained from a live or actually dead wildlife. And in our laws currently, the Wildlife Act, which is the law which is governing the use of wildlife products, possession of wildlife products, is pretty much the harshest law in Africa right now to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's in comparison to other countries?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Bona Paul,
Yes.
people ask, KWS anafanyanga nini? And many Kenyans think they only go to the national park and that's when they see members of your team. So maybe just clarify on what your team does.
Yeah, Kenya Wildlife Service is the one that helps to conserve, and probably that's a very big word.
Yes.
But basically, it just means looking after the welfare of the wildlife in the country, as well as the habitats that they exist. Kenya, fortunately, is very blessed in terms of if you look at the diversity from the marines to the snow-capped Mount Kenya, and yet it's on the equator, to wetlands, to normal grasslands, we call them savannas, as well as, in fact, deserts. You know, we have 3 deserts in Kenya. I know that one is the one that is very well known, but we do have 2 others. So all those habitats have wildlife, and wildlife goes beyond animals. It also includes plants. It also includes microorganisms.
Okay.
So it's very wide, and our job is to make sure that we do protect and conserve, but also apply or enforce the laws and regulations that go with it. And that's for Kenya, as well as now the international platform.
Okay. And from what you've mentioned and what he's described, it's basically wildlife crime works against what you stand for.
Absolutely.
So maybe in a nutshell, tell us, how are we doing in regards to wildlife crime in Kenya?
In terms of its occurrence, it's been long-standing in the country. I guess whenever you have something that is really valuable, then people try to own it or take it, without due regard. And therefore, utilization of wildlife then has to be defined so that we agree on exactly how do we utilize. It is when now people go against that, the set regulations, that now you find that we have big issues. When we had sport hunting allowed in Kenya in the years before, people went overboard.
Okay.
And this is because they were looking for trophies. And trophy hunters will look for the best. But in terms of conservation, they are removing from the gene pool exactly what we need.
Okay.
So that is the reason why in 1977, it was a stop was put to hunting, and in 78, any trade with any of the products or trophies in the country.
Okay. Thank you for that. So Anthony, let me ask you, are Kenyans very big on conservation? Are we?
Oh, yes, actually.
Ordinary Kenyan, not the Karanis and the Pauls. Ordinary Kenyan, you and I.
Actually, yes and no. In terms of how the community understands wildlife, in terms of tourism and the rest, Kenyans right now actually are taking a higher path. But in terms of actually issues on how they can actually help support wildlife conservation, that's the actual gap that we have currently. That they really don't know how they can actually help to participate in actually helping in reporting cases of wildlife crime or wildlife issues that they're actually doing, because at a particular point, each and every person in the public always has done a crime that can inflict wildlife in one or another.
Okay.
It might not be actually the way Jim has actually defined it, just basically handling trophies, but I think it's more of a broader aspect of it, because you can actually be handling wildlife money from a given point of view. So you as a public citizen need to understand where actually am I getting these kinds of cash flow coming in.
Okay.
So that's also something that we Kenyans have to actually take part in actually understanding all the issues surrounding wildlife crime.
Okay, so we are trying.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
trying.
Could I add something on to
Go
that?
ahead.
Because I know that in 1968, there was a lot of work that was done by the establishment of wildlife clubs of Kenya. And they were very, very instrumental in carrying out campaigns to get the government to actually ban in 1977 and 1978. It is because they feel that they really own this wildlife. It's their wildlife. And I know that there is another example. During former President Kibaki, he went to Thailand, and usually they would discuss with other presidents. And we have received gifts. Gifts for the African leaders was something that was common. We received tigers from India. We got the pygmy hippo from West Africa. So I think in just keeping with that, they discussed in Thailand, and they agreed that we were going to give some animals to Thailand.
Okay.
But do you know Kenyans actually demonstrated in this country, saying that our animals, the president was placed in that position to lead, but not to make unilateral decisions, that he needed to get back to them for them to give permission. And they did something that I thought that was exceptional. They actually got people from Thailand to come and demonstrate in Kenya.
Wow.
To say,
Okay.
we don't want your animals, while we were saying we don't want our animals to go. So I think Kenyans have shown over time. I remember I was the senior warden for Nairobi National Park, and one of the leopards had found its way to one of the urban areas.
Yes.
And because of the nature, the way that it was handled, it was very stressed, because it looks like it was caught out. Morning was coming, the leopard was now moving from one compound to another. And therefore, before we could say Gutenberg, there were so many people who had never seen a leopard before, so they came. So we actually were forced to kill that leopard, because it was going to injure people very badly.
Okay.
You will not believe the number of calls, the number of visits that they came, because it was following a situation where we had moved quite a number of animals from Laikipia to Meru.
Okay.
They could not understand how we could not handle one leopard, yet we had moved 50 elephants.
Okay.
So they were saying, so I know that they are very particular, and there would be many examples even today where they actually stand up and say, no, we do not want that kind of thing.
Okay.
When the new act was being done, there was a lot of pressure for people who like to do sport hunting. And they would come out and say, munajua vile tulifanywa jana, lakini hii mambo ya hunting hatutaki. So they were being coerced or being kind of like corrupted to accept. So, but when they come to the forum, they let the cat out of the basket, so we get to know that they were actually being kind of bribed so that they could now bring that. So they do love their wildlife.
Okay.
And they tell us very many stories, from the coast about dolphins, about dugongs, the legendary mermaid, to Mount Kenya, where some people actually go on foot, just wearing a T-shirt. You know how cold that can be. They just love. So from all across the habitats, you will be hearing stories from Kenyans themselves telling you about this wildlife.
Okay.
So I do know that they love it, and they keep asking, how can we help? How can we get involved?
It means you're doing a good job.
It means Kenyans themselves
are doing a good job.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Now, Karen, I have a question. One of the challenges we have is the human-wildlife coexistence, because one is on the other's land, whichever you look at it. And we have the law requiring that we think about the community interest when you're setting up the parks. So I have a question. He said Kenyans love animals, but there are those who fight with their animals. So is it the pastoralists who need to change their lifestyle and move, or is it your team and his who need to move the animals? What happens?
Well, it's a really complicated issue in Kenya, and for the risk of oversimplifying a very complex area, I will use my example. Now, I come from and I hail from the Meru area, which is right next to Mount Kenya National Park, right in the middle of a very well-known dispersal area in Chogoria, especially living off the sublocation of the Ga. 3 months ago, people in the Ga literally butchered an elephant to death and ate it.
Had we had the discussion with you when you came here?
Yeah, we pretty much talked about
Yes.
it then. And
Yes.
it was, I think, 2-3 days fresh. Now, what happened there, it was butchered by retaliating farmers. Because one big thing that has happened is we have really tried to address this issue of human wildlife conflict, but we have faltered in some areas.
Okay.
Now, Kenya Wildlife Service, with the capacity it has, can only do so much. So we have tried fencing all around, but fences, trust me, don't work. To some species, for example, monkeys don't respect fences. That doesn't happen. Big elephants don't really see fences as an issue because they just steamroll and just troll them to the ground. Now, what has happened here is because of the lack of compensation structures and schemes that are dependable and reliable to the local Kenyan, available to local Kenyans, it means if my grandmother has planted her cabbages right next to the fence of the national park, and an elephant bulldozes through that and completely eats all those cabbages, and my grandmother has no way to get the money back, she sees her entire life savings and work has disappeared. Her entire harvest is gone in a flash, in a blink. To her, the anger she has will be to retaliate. Now imagine if the same elephant kills someone. Now that dynamic completely changes.
That's true.
But now let me show you how crazy this now becomes. Because there's no way for them to be compensated. They must stop that elephant from doing what it will do. Because if it has fed on that shamba today, trust me, it will come back again tomorrow.
Okay.
So they do that, and we end up losing twice. Once we've lost the harvest my grandmother had worked herself for years to cultivate, and now secondly, we've lost one of our most iconic tourism revenue earners. Now, what should be happening currently is that the benefit that we are drawing from tourism, which, by the way, we were taught in all those geography classrooms.
Yes.
Tourism is our number one revenue earner.
Yes.
But is tourism supporting conservation directly? How much money are we plowing back? Truly, the benefit of conservation is going to the tourist who flies down into Kenya to see this. But the risk of these animals goes to my grandmother. My grandmother shares her fair share of fault. Let's be very honest. You cannot plant things that obviously are attractive to elephants right next to where elephants dispersal areas are.
Yes.
My grandmother has taken over land which used to be historically elephant dispersal areas. That's something me and her need to talk about. And then secondly, most Kenyans who live right next to wildlife dispersal areas are not doing agriculture or an economic activity which is compatible with conservation. We all know for a fact you cannot put a bar right next to a primary school. We all know that. Why? Because the two are not compatible land uses. But you go to Amboseli, you go to Masai Mara, you find people planting cabbages, vegetables, right next to an elephant, dispersal area. This is literally a buffet for an
them.
elephant. It's like leaving sweets with kids and hoping that none of them will eat it. It's literally, those are the issues. If farmers get fair and due processed compensation, which is very fast and reliable, they will never touch those animals.
Okay.
If Kenyans who live right next to parks get the benefit of having wildlife on their land, which is based purely on wildlife user benefits, then they will never even need to farm there, because that's where animals deserve to be.
Okay, I hear you. Anthony, when I'm listening to what he's saying and the use of land, have communities understood why they need to move away from where animals are? Have they?
Actually, they're not supposed to move away.
Okay.
They're actually supposed to, because if you look at the previous histories, we as Africans have actually lived with these animals.
What happened?
Colonization happened.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a whole other topic.
Yes.
It's a whole other topic. Okay.
But with that being existing, is that currently we just have to, at least as much as possible, adjust, because even wildlife themselves are trying to, as much as possible, adjust with our presence. Having fences, yes, there's some sections that work, but we as human beings have actually become more greedy in terms of actually accessing land. We need land, yes, it's paramount, it feeds us, but at the same time, we have to create a balance between wildlife and us. And the conflicts come in between because wildlife are used to particular routes, and these particular routes connect them between different ecosystems.
Okay.
Like case, for example, if you look at elephants moving from between Mount Kenya through Laikipia to Aberdares, it's a long stretch, but they have to go through some parcel of land in between. So if these particular corridors are actually interfered with, conflicts has to exist. But now then there are two kinds of conflicts. The conflict that is inflicted by wildlife itself, and then there's conflict that actually humans themselves inflict.
Okay.
So we both have to actually, all of us have to actually understand that we, as much as possible, should figure out or get proper land uses to actually be able to sustain and conserve wildlife. Yeah.
Okay. When you talked about greed, I'm thinking people hear land and their minds go nuts. Let me ask you, Paul, have KWS done their very best to sensitize with these communities the need of coexisting peacefully with the animals?
Yeah, and I think we also need to remember that there is indigenous knowledge. So we learn from the communities as well.
Okay.
It would be very wrong to then think that you're going to tell them. In fact, I remember one case, we had one of our directors and we went to Tana River and we were sitting, the meeting was under a tree right next to the river. And they actually challenged our director and they said, look behind you, do you see crocodiles, do you see hippos? Do you know that we have contributed and continue to conserve way before Kenya Wildlife Service was formed? We brought these primates, the Tana Mangabe and the colubuses that are there. We brought them from Congo DRC when we were migrating. You look at the history of movement of people around across Africa. So I think there is always need to remember, and KWS has invested a lot in community relations, because we realize close to 70%, maybe 60-70% of wildlife is actually found outside protected areas.
Okay.
So we can't move all the animals and take them to the parks because they exist on the outside anyway.
Yes.
So I think the thing has been to appreciate that with human population increase, conversion of lands, that this would definitely put pressure on the wildlife. And therefore, I think, as Anthony is pointing out, it's a question of now designing models that work. And that is why you have the Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association. They are picking groups, local groups, who own land and who ordinarily would have their livestock, or they would do some form of farming or something. But then also to accommodate wildlife and undertake ecotourism, because we want to say that first, KWS's job is also to protect people, the people of Kenya, from the damages that would be inflicted by wildlife. But because we may not police every single animal in the country, we then have to find and design ways of now getting them to coexist. For example, in rivers, we actually work together with the communities and say, how do you access water and at the same time protect yourselves from being attacked by crocodiles?
Yes.
So there is a design where you put some poles in the river, kind of like, concrete them around, so you create a bay.
Yes.
So there is water where you can access, but you have to make it that make sure that you bring these poles to come completely off the river onto the land, so then crocodiles don't go around, and they are close enough to stop crocs, penetrating. So that then now they can comfortably use that section of the river to then be able to come and swim or get their water.
Okay.
And that is something that we learned from the communities themselves, because they will say, as long as you're in the water and you're splashing, crocs don't like disturbed waters. So that is the reason why sometimes when they're going to fetch, they would beat while the other one is now getting the water.
Oh, that
but
makes
now
sense.
we say,
Okay.
go another step and make sure that you protect yourself.
Okay.
That's why you will find that there's discussions about using lion lights. You are using the natural history of the animal, understanding it, so that cats see very well at night. If you now start playing around with their seeing, meaning their retina is dilating and then constricting because the lights come on and then within a short while they go off. So you disturb them to the extent that they actually cannot hunt. So by using those lion lights, we are now using the natural history and sharing with the local communities. So now they can be able to say, yes, this is something we can attend. For certain areas where elephants come, we know that elephants are so intelligent that if they see any hanging wire, they will never pass until they check whether it is powered. And because they use their trunk,
Yes.
and the tip of it is moist, the moment they touch, if it is powered, it's a psychological thing. So it's not so much the strength of the fence. It's just two strands, and it's a psychological effect. So again, you're working with communities and saying, let us do this because the natural history of the animal tells you that this is something that we can be able to coexist. So that's why they use even pepper. They mix pepper with used oil, put it on a rope, and then they tie it around the farm. So in some cases, like in Laikipia, they've tested and they've seen that they don't like, or the use of bees. So you put bees there and they don't like the sound of bees. They don't like any little small thing attempting to get to their trunk.
Okay.
So I think that coexistence is what we are advocating for. Because you can't say remove all the animals, take them to the parks.
Yeah.
Because they didn't exist there in totality
Okay.
before. We've always had the wildlife. So it's a question of, for each area, we then are able to say, what is the conflict and how can we mitigate so that we continue coexisting. Then now, what Karani was saying, we make sure that the value of wildlife comes back to the people. Because if they don't see the value, they're not interested. That is why this new act suddenly injected some kind of life into people, because not only now are they involved in conservation, they are required to even do management plan for their areas. And now, because of these committees that are still being worked out, the county, they were now actually involved in those counties, and they provided the leadership. The chairmen of those were brought to office through a competitive process. In other words, they actually applied for the job,
Yes.
shortlisted, interviewed, and they got it from each county. And then they were told to find 4 other members who were brought to office through an elective process. So the wildlife associations in each county would then elect a representative to go to those counties. So then those county conservation and compensation committees are beefed up now with the national and the county government. So you have KWS there, you have the Ministry of Interior, you have NEMA. So they actually are involved. So all they do is just check what is the overarching strategy, and then they create theirs and they dovetail. Because the guys of coast are dealing with the marine animals.
Yes.
The ones of the mountains are dealing with forest animals. The ones in the desert are dealing. So they are best placed to then be able to say, for our case, this is how we are going to implement that strategy, the national one. So
Okay.
they dovetail. So I think it's very important to then just understand that we need to go that direction. In fact, it is so important that the communities are represented in the board of trustees of Kenya Wildlife Service. That's how close this law wants to bring the communities and their participation and so on.
Okay.
And I know that it's still got some distance to travel, but the intention is to bring back to the people themselves that apathy where they thought the parks are for wazungus.
Yes.
Now we see Nairobi National Park, enjoys a 50%, attention from the locals, the citizens, and Nakuru as well. So they come, they engage us, they ask us questions, they question everything that we are doing that they feel is not right, and that's how it should be.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are not trying to remove the animals from the people. They will stay with them, but for each case it is checked, discussed with the local communities, and agreed how do they continue coexisting.
Okay.
And I'm not saying it's easy.
Yes, yeah, it's not easy, but I like that it comes from the community. That way, it's their responsibility and they have that sense of ownership. We'll listen to a song and then we'll continue this conversation. We'll engage Karani on whether the law works for prosecution of wildlife crime in Kenya. But first, we'll listen to Stephen Curtis Chapman with the song Glorious Unfolding, and we'll continue this conversation. Now we are live on Family TV, also live on Family Radio. And let me tell you, Iko Shida. Karani, what's the problem with funding? Let's get there. Let's talk about it. KWS needs more money. Your company needs more money. Agencies need money. Do you have enough money?
Let me just zero down to just KWS.
Yes.
Truly, KWS needs more money in their budget. I am too far removed for me to be speaking about that. I have privilege having coming from the civil society environment where there's someone absolutely capable to do that. But from current signals from what we're seeing, is that conservation has always been put us at the back of our minds, that it's the last thing we think about. Even way back then, if you think about it, the Ministry of Environment was seen as that less beautiful ministry where people will go there as a form of punishment. If you go to most of our parks, the way KWS is currently set up, it does not truly have the resources to compensate people for human-wildlife conflict. That has come out clearly over the last 3 years. 2, KWS truly is relying a lot from donor support to just survive and thrive in itself. In all fairness, we don't see other disciplined forces doing that. We don't see KDF asking for funds. We don't see the National Police Service asking for funds.
You're going to go there.
It's KWS which is down there. And in all fairness, think about it this way. If tourism is the golden goose that gives us this golden egg of dollars every single year, then in all fairness, KWS is the person who protects that golden goose. And here we are telling him, no, let the goose's feathers be plucked a little bit, everything will be okay. The amount of money we're applying back to conservation is minuscule, is a tiny fraction of the amount that truly wildlife is giving out there. And I'll give you prime examples. The Kenyan generating power through in all the 7 Forks dams, 7 of them, is nothing without the Abadeas ecosystem, which is fully protected by KWS. It's nothing without the Mount Kenya ecosystem, which is truly protected by the will and people of the central counties and of course Kenya Wildlife Service. Mzima Springs, which is literally the only thing that KWS have closest to clear water and fresh water, is nothing without the protection of KWS on the ground. But do they receive any benefit whatsoever from this? Absolutely not. There's a very huge disconnect here.
Okay. Before I get to Paul, yes, I wanted to get your thought before we get the inside story. Yes.
So I think mostly of why we have these particular issues is because we don't have a specific law that stipulates how ecosystem services needs to be managed.
Okay.
Even though Kenyan can be actually within that particular premise of in the Abadeas Park, there is no particular law that describes that in every particular year Kenyan has to produce or give KWS this particular amount of money. Or in the case of now Murang'a, Nairobi County, how much exactly should we give Murang'a for actually continuously conserving the waters up there?
The governor wants 25%.
So there is no particular law in the country right now that really helps on managing a proper ecosystem services system, whereby we know if even for instance, plastic bags, if you use a plastic bag, there's 1 shilling that goes to a given organization or to help conserve the environment one or another. So those particular laws haven't been put in place yet. And if any particular point that I'm given a chance is KWS should be given more resources. More resources in the sense that it should have resources almost similar to KDF. Because if 13.5% of the GDP comes from tourism, why not give it that particular attention? I know we have issues of hunger, housing, and the rest, which are very, very important. I won't really dwell in that. But at the same time, these are the same things that actually can help an economy grow. Because if we have proper systems whereby we have our wildlife protected, we can get more funds and revenues to actually continuously help livelihoods of Kenyans. But then we need to get a proper system whereby we use, as much as we use, we need to figure out how do we pay those services that wildlife actually give, because you cannot actually put a value on wildlife. And that is actually where we all actually go wrong, because when you put a value to wildlife, and wildlife does not actually limit us to only elephants.
Okay.
It goes to the little insects. We stay actually with wildlife in our homes and the plants. So we just need to actually not value them, but see them as more of things that actually enable us to continue living. So we just have to get a proper system. We've not got there yet.
Okay.
But we need those systems to be put in place.
Sorry, before I get to you, will the county system work if each county comes up with a law and decide if you're going to use water from Moranga, if you're going to use this at Aberdares, will that work?
To some extent, yes. And
Okay.
then to some extent, no.
Okay, we'll get to that. Bonapol,
Yes.
what does underfunding KWS mean on the ground? What does that look like?
I think first of all, we need to just appreciate that conservation is an extremely expensive venture.
Okay.
Let's just begin from there. There is no country in the world that can actually let its wildlife and conservation activities on their own and expect them to fund themselves. So
Okay.
I think that's the first point. So it then means that you have to be ingenious in terms of the way that you resource mobilize. And that is the reason why for the case of Kenya, tourism is actually incidental. It was not the reason why we set up national parks or why we have wildlife. It's
Okay.
not because of tourism. Tourism is an offshoot. And obviously we have to manage it properly so that then it gives us the optimum returns. So, but that's only one bit. We have to think of other ways of now raising funding. And that is why the national government has to give a rebate. And every year they have to give us money to then come and support some of the activities. Some of the parks don't generate much revenue. If you go to Kiunga, for example, that is on the border between us and Dodori, they are back to back. They have the richest biodiversity, marine biodiversity anywhere. But then, because of all the insecurity around that particular area, they don't receive as much tourism as you would expect.
Okay.
It then means that their management has to be funded and supported by another park. That's why you'll find out of the 63 or so parks and reserves, that maybe about 10 really make money that then is used to support the operations of the rest.
Okay.
If we were to leave it, like, say, Nairobi National Park, if you were to leave it, it will make enough money to cover its budget. Because if it requires 70 million per year and it's making 300 million, it means that it can just get on with it.
Okay.
And I think that is the danger of what Karani is pointing out, the issue of looking at certain assets that we need to own as a country. Because if we allow, for example, and this is my personal opinion, if we allow Murang'a to then charge, it means now Turkana will charge for
Exactly,
oil,
yeah.
Nairobi will charge for Central Bank, Coast will charge for Kenya Ports Authority. There's need to think national at some point. There would be certain aspects that we look, because then otherwise we'll start now charging. The coast people will charge for their dugongs. The desert people will charge for their ostriches and their gerenarchs and the reticulated giraffe, because they are not found in other places.
Okay.
So I think we just need to be careful how we navigate that particular point, and then find development partners. So first we generate revenue from within. Tourism is one, but also the other resources that we can be able to say. KWS, for example, has been developing a special purpose vehicle, meaning a body that can then be able to deal with the business arm of conservation. So that's why we have ecotourism, the lodges, and in just the recent past, we went there with our prospectors and we presented about 10, 20 sites in the national parks that are usually not easy to get. We've advertised, but then now people say, okay, Sibilo is a good national park, yes, and we know it is paleontology, and that's where all humans began, for those who believe in this. But who is going to transport material to build a hotel, a good hotel in Sibilo?
Okay.
So we've even tried to say, come, you'll be given even 10 years just to get your act together and move the material, build, and then start operating. Certain places don't render themselves to immediate, investments. So we have to think in terms of how then can we get that business group to now start thinking and come and actually invest in the park. So as a way of now resource mobilizing.
Okay.
And then other activities like now I was pointing out about the Mzima Springs, for example. If we wanted to bottle water, and it is so natural, that water you see at Mzima Springs, if you drink that water, you are drinking history. 23 years it's gone through lava. It rained in Kilimanjaro, in Chulu, and has gone through underground, being sieved and cleaned and given good minerals, and then it gushes 23 years later at Mzima Springs. If we bottled that, how natural would you want to go if you don't take that particular one?
Okay.
But then because of the nature of the organization and government structures, we would have to create that business arm, and this is what we are now proposing, to then be able to say, how can we get resources mobilized on one side, even as we get the support from development partners, even as we get rebate from the national government. And yes, I think it would be very important to get the nation thinking about the kind of work that KWS does, which is beyond just wildlife. Because the fisheries industry on the coast in particular, we have the parks where, the marine parks, where all the fisheries breed, and then they go out into the reserve, where now all the fishermen go and be able to bid. That function of protecting the breeding site for all the fisheries, to then support the fisheries industry, and it's quite big. How do we get that compensated by the other sectors of the country? Look at water. We talked about Chulu, we've talked about Mount Elgon, we've talked about Aberdare, we've talked about Mount Kenya, protecting that for the water. And then you go to energy, because there's geothermal, and then there's, of course, the hydro. So how do we get around to getting these other sectors to then support conservation work? I think that's a discussion that truly needs to be brought to the fore. So then now we can get all the other beneficiaries to then be able to contribute back, because conservation is expensive.
Okay.
And it needs the input of everybody.
How do we make you CS is the question.
Sorry?
I'm kidding. I was asking how we make you a CS.
We already have a CS. All he needs to know is very simple, if I may jump into this.
Yes.
One,
Yes.
if the governor of Turkana can argue that the people of Turkana need 30% of all oil revenue, I honestly want to believe the cabinet secretary in charge of tourism and wildlife can argue that something from tourism can go to wildlife. It's not simple. I may run the risk of oversimplifying a very complex idea, but it has been done before.
Okay.
And back to the question of before, of can counties charge other people for things that come from their own counties? It has been done before. If you're getting your tomatoes and potatoes from Kinangop, this says collectors. That's taxation. Okay. And they passed it through negotiation, through their own county assemblies. Literally, we need better negotiators looking out for KWS and going like, where you're taking too much from the park. Can you just ameliorate something back to the park? It doesn't mean that, say, ecosystem services does only look like hard coal, stone coal, cash. It also goes back to things like mitigation, like afforestation, things like those, trying to keep the water towers working. We can't sit here and pretend that we didn't just watch over 3,000 Kenyans get evicted from a forest so that we can still keep having the magical river crossing at the River Mara. We can't. These things are very real. There are places where we honestly need to put more money so that they be protected. Otherwise, they will all dissipate away.
Okay. I was actually coming back to you and talking about now the fines and imprisonment that we have. Now that is your...
Now this is what I do. It's my bread and butter.
Go ahead.
As a lawyer, my bit is to ensuring that the law works, that governance processes are actually upheld. So as you may understand, wildlife crime runs an affront to anything, rule of law. We usually think that wildlife crime is a true double-edged sword.
Okay.
It cuts at reducing our wildlife, and again, it cuts at reducing our revenue. We lose twice. Now, me and my team, funded by the Elephant Crisis Fund through Save the Elephants, my team at Wildlife Direct, have formed a very amazing partnership. As he's talking about special purpose vehicles, we do our public-private partnerships. We joined with the judiciaries just to ensure and to figure out ourselves how well is the law working at stopping wildlife crime. So we were seeing all this Jersey arrests, we were seeing people being brought to court, but our biggest question was that's actually ending up in any convictions? When we started our Hands Off Elephants campaign a couple of years ago, pretty much like a decade ago, there was a serious scourge on poaching in this country. We were losing a lot of wildlife. Then the government was in pure denial, saying that it's not a big crisis as you think it is. There was actually a published document from the Ministry of Environment then, which was an 85-page document saying how poaching is not a national disaster. Look where we are now.
Yes.
So at that point, we had a very less punitive Wildlife Act. Literally, it was a slap on the wrist fines. We found with Ivory, the fine was, 4,000 to 10,000?
Yeah.
We have an amazing case where me and him know about this, where a poacher was fined and then asked for a lift from the same rangers to go back to the park so he can continue doing what he does, because the fine was very simple.
Okay.
So what happened? KWS, out of infinite wisdom, created the Wildlife Act, of course with pressure from civil society. They were able to pass the world's strongest wildlife law currently existing. We are talking of penalties, up to life imprisonment. These are serious penalties. So my team went to all the courts in the country, and we've published over 8 years of research, but this is our third report, which shows just how well Kenya is handling wildlife crime. Titled, aptly titled On the Right Path, it's truly just trying to show if Kenya is the premier country in solving wildlife crime issues, well, how well are we actually doing that?
Okay.
So we analyzed over 1,000 cases in 121 courts with around 2,000 accused individuals. What we found was amazing. At least 90% of all offenders were Kenyans, which shows that despite us loving this wildlife, we're still the ones who are committing these crimes.
We all think it's somebody from another country who comes and does it.
No. Yeah. Trust me. It's the same communities we want to protect wildlife.
Okay.
This is why it's very important to connect with communities. Once they are sold onto the game of conservation, they are the only line of defense we need.
Okay.
We will never need rangers. That's a problem. Now, what we ended up finding is that the elephant, of course, for obvious reasons, and its ivory being, heavily trafficked and heavily sold in the black market, was the most imperiled species by wildlife crime. We were seeing a lot of ivory in most of the cases. Then something fascinating that we noticed. A couple of years ago, our conviction rate, when the law was very bad and weak, our conviction rate was at 44%, which meant every person we brought to court, at least 4 out of every 10 were being convicted, 6 were walking free.
Okay.
Now, there's a very, very, very firm conviction rate. We're talking of 95% conviction rate. This is what our data shows, and data doesn't lie.
Okay. Possible to get to 100?
Well, we hope it gets to 100. This means every time someone is accused, there will be 100% chance in conviction that they will be brought to justice. But then again, what we found out is, this being Kenya, the 95% is only targeting low-level trafficking. So low-level poachers have been arrested. But as you may know, when we were here actually the last time, it was right before the conviction of the appeal of Faisal Ali Mohammed, who was at the time East Africa's most wanted ivory trafficker. He was on Interpol's most wanted list. Evidence was laid against him. He was convicted for 20 years and to pay a fine of 20 million. And then 2 years into his sentence, he was actually released, walking amongst us.
Okay.
Now,
back to business.
What this shows is that we may have truly addressed low-level poaching and low-level trafficking to a point that KWS authoritatively can say poaching has gone down by 85%. That is amazing. We are now 95% conviction rate for low-profile trafficking. That is amazing. But then the high-profile trafficking, which is in its nature transnational, organized, and it's infused with a lot of corrupt elements, has simply gone unaddressed.
Okay.
Just this year, Faisal Ali Mohammed is now out. He was being charged for the possession of 2,512 kilograms of elephant ivory. That is nothing compared to the acquittal that happened earlier this year in February. A less-known trafficker, Nicholas Maweo, was set free, completely acquitted, for having 3.8 tons, that's 3,800 800 kgs of elephant ivory, walked away. According to that case, there's no one who committed this crime.
Okay.
So what we're saying is high-profile trafficking still needs to be addressed. There are other issues that also need to be addressed too. The illegal grazing in parks, it's pretty much the #1 offense in Kenya. So wildlife trafficking and wildlife poaching is easily 20%, but the other 80% is split between bushmeat and mostly up to 52% illegal grazing and illegal entry in parks.
Yes.
Most of our parks, especially Tsavo National Park, I will want to believe there's more cattle in India than there is actually wildlife.
And it's harder to, yeah.
And it's insane because KWS at this point, capacity-wise, cannot truly deal with that issue because one, the expanse of some of those parks, and then two, the complexity of dealing with this, knowing the social conditioning of most pastoralist communities. As you may know, they use children, right?
Yes.
So imagine me and Katitu are doing our patrol inside the park. We bump into a kid with 500 heads of cattle. First of all, how do you process that crime scene? Where do you keep those cattle, knowing that KWS does not have a corral or a shed where you can take the cattle? Meaning that during the process and the progression of that case, the same cattle will be left in the park, perpetuating the same crime and offense. Second, don't forget, there's a child involved here, which means this Wildlife Act, despite it being amazing as it is, cannot be applied towards children. They will literally be allowed to walk.
I need you for your own show.
I know.
Let's talk about the legal aspects. I need to give you the last one. We have about 2 minutes. Sure. So I'll ask you this. What do you want to see happen in the conservancy scene? That way we achieve what they're both fighting for much faster. Because I think it can be done faster.
Yes, it can be done faster. All we just need is it's synergies and collaboration between different agencies, different partners, different players, because we need to move away from mentioning that wildlife is for KWS. It's actually us that own wildlife. So guys from the corporate need to figure out how are they giving back CSR amounts back to KWS. Like I feel like KWS own every particular animal right now. Even though we own it, but they have control of it. So if you look like guys, I hope I won't put some people on the flag, but if you look at guys of KCB using the lion, how much are they giving to conserve that particular species of a lion?
Okay.
So if we go back to the corporate and ask them, you guys are actually using emblems that depict. So how much are you guys actually producing back to wildlife? So we just need to figure out that partnership. Look for avenues where you can fundraise because at the moment, KWS needs a lot of money.
Okay.
And that money, not just needed, but needs to be managed well. Again, that's another aspect of it.
That's a whole other, yes.
So, yeah, so synergies and collaboration is actually important. And then the wildlife crimes have to be followed up actually much more properly, especially the bigger fishes that really can't, they feel like they're not actually part of the law, but nature has its way of dealing with such people. That's the sad part.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's why we have the lawyers to fight for animals. Karani, thank you very much. Paul Gadito, asante sana. Anthony, asanteni sana. We needed 4 hours. We only had an hour. So thank you so much for coming through. And thank you for watching. Please see where you can plug in this conversation. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.